Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud While Stoned. Today we're going to start Little Blue Book number 4, and it is titled The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. Now, The Age of Reason was originally written in 1792, something like that. Somebody Google it and tell me in the comments. But this is this was edited and published by E. Heidelman Julius for the Little Blue Book Company, or what they're titled 10-cent Pocket Series. So, The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. Here we go. I believe in the equality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy. But, lest it should be supposed that I believe many other things in addition to these, I shall, in the progress of this work, declare the things I do not believe, and my reasons for not believing them. I do not believe in the creed professed by the Jewish Church, the Roman Church, by the Greek Church, by the Turkish Church, by the Protestant Church, nor by any church that I know of. My own mind is my own church. All national institutions of churches, whether Jewish, Christian, or Turkish, appear to me no other than human inventions, set up to terrify and enslave mankind, and monopolize power and profit. I do not mean by this declaration to condemn those who believe otherwise. They have the same right to their belief as I have to mine. But it is necessary to the happiness of man that he be mentally faithful to himself. Infidelity does not consist in believing or in disbelieving. It consists in professing to believe what he does not believe. It is impossible to calculate the moral mischief, if I may so express it, that mental lying, turning the page, mental lying has produced in society, when a man has so far corrupted and prostituted the chastity of his mind as to subscribe his professional belief to things he does not believe. He has prepared himself for the commission of every other crime. He takes up the trade of a priest for the sake of gain, and in order to qualify himself for that trade, he begins with a perjury. Can we conceive anything more destructive to morality than this? The adulterous connection of church and state, wherever it has taken place, whether Jewish, Christian, or Turkish, and I'm pretty sure they're talking about Muslims when they're calling it Turkish. That's what they called it then. Had so effectually prohibited by pains and penalties every discussion upon established creeds and upon first principles of religion, that until the system of government should be changed, those subjects could not be brought fairly and openly before the world, but that whenever this should be done, a revolution in the system of religion would follow. Human interventions and priestcraft would be detected, and man would return to the pure, unmixed, and unadulterated belief of one God, and no more. Every national church or religion has established itself by pretending some special mission from God, communicated to their certain individuals. The Jews have their Moses, the Christians their Jesus Christ, their apostles and saints, and the Turks their Muhammad, as if the way of God was not open to every man alike. Each of these churches show certain books which they call Revelation, or the Word of God. The Jews say that their Word of God was given by God to Moses, face to face. The Christians say that their Word of God came by divine inspiration, and the Turks say that their Word of God, the Quran, was brought by an angel from heaven. Each of these churches accuse the other of unbelief, and, for my own part, I disbelieve them all. It is a contradiction in terms and ideas to call anything a revelation that comes to us at second hand, either verbally or in writing. Revelation is necessarily limited to the first communication. After this, it is only an account of something, which that person says was a revelation made to him. And though he may find himself obliged to believe it, it cannot be incumbent on me to believe it in the same manner. For it was not a revelation made to me, and I have only his word for it, and that it was made to him. When Moses told the children of Israel that he received the 2 tables of the commandments from the hands of God, they were not obliged to believe him, because they had no other authority for it than his telling them so. And I have no other authority for it than some historian telling me so. The commandments carry no internal evidence of divinity with them. They contain some good moral precepts, such as any man qualified to be a lawgiver or a legislator could produce himself, without having recourse in supernatural intervention. When I am told that the Quran was written in heaven and brought to Muhammad by an angel, the account comes too near the same kind of heresy evidence and second-hand authority as the former. I did not see the angel myself, and therefore I have a right not to believe it. When also I am told that a woman called the Virgin Mary said or gave out that she was with child without any cohabitation with a man, and that her betrothed husband Joseph said that an angel told him so, I have a right to believe them or not. Such a circumstance required a much stronger evidence than their bare word for it. But we have not even this, for neither Joseph nor Mary wrote any such matter themselves. It is only reported by others that they said so. It is heresy upon heresy, and I do not choose to rest my belief upon such evidence. It is, however, not difficult to account for the credit that was given to the story of Jesus Christ being the Son of God. He was born when the heathen mythology had still some fashion and repute in the world, and that mythology had prepared the people for the belief of such a story. Almost all the extraordinary men that lived under the heaven mythology were reputed to be the sons of some of their gods. It was not a new thing at this time to believe a man to have been celestially begotten. The intercourse of gods with women was then a matter of familiar opinion. Their Jupiter, according to their accounts, had cohabited with hundreds. The story, therefore, had nothing in it either new, wonderful, or obscene. It was conformable to the opinions that then prevailed among the people called Gentiles, or mythologists. And it was those people only that believed it. The Jews, who had kept strictly to the belief of one God, and no more, and who had always rejected the heathen mythology, never credited the story. It is curious to observe how the theory of what is called the Christian Church sprung out of the tale of heathen mythology. A direct incorporation took place in the first instance by making the reputed founder to be celestially begotten. The trinity of gods that then followed was no other than a reduction of the former plurality, which was about 20 or 30,000. The statue of Mary succeeded the statue of Diana of Cephes. The deification of heroes changed into the canonization of saints. The mythologist had gods for everything. The Christian mythologist had saints for everything. The church becomes as crowded with the one as the pantheon had been with the other. And Rome was the place of both. The Christian theory is little else than the idolatry of the ancient mythologist, accommodated to the purposes of power and revenue. And it yet remains the reason and philosophy to abolish the amphibious fraud. Nothing that is here said can apply, even with the most distant disrespect, to the real character of Jesus Christ. He was a virtuous and amiable man. The morality that he preached and practiced was of the most benevolent kind. Turning the page. Some of these pages can be very difficult to turn. Come on now. There we go. Alright. Now I forgot what the last sentence was. The morality that he preached and practiced was of the most benevolent kind. And though similar systems of morality had been preached by Confucius, and by some of the Greek philosophers many years before, by the Quakers since, and by many good men in all ages, it has not been exceeded by any. Jesus Christ wrote no account of himself, of his birth, parentage, or anything else. Not a line of what is called the New Testament is of his own writing. The history of him is altogether the work of other people. And as to the account given of his resurrection and ascension, it was the necessary counterpart of the story of his birth. His historians, having brought him into the world in a supernatural manner, were obliged to take him out again in the same manner, or the first part of the story must have fallen to the ground. The wretched contrivance with which this latter part is told exceeds everything that went before it. The first part, that of the miraculous conception, was not a thing that admitted of publicity, and therefore the tellers of this part of the story had this advantage, that though they might not be credited, they could not be detected. They could not be expected to prove it, because it was not one of those things that admitted of proof, and it was impossible that the person to whom it was told could prove it himself. But the resurrection of a dead person from the grave, and his ascension through the air, is a thing very different as to the evidence it admits of. To the invisible conception of a child in the womb, the resurrection and ascension supporting them to have taken place admitted of public and ocular demonstration, like that of the ascension of a balloon or the sun at noonday, to all Jerusalem at least. A thing which everybody is required to believe requires that the proof and evidence of it should be equal to all and universal, and as the public visibility of this last related act was the only evidence that could give sanction to the former part, the whole of it falls to the ground, because that evidence never was given. Instead of this, a small number of persons, not more than 8 or 9, are introduced as proxies for the whole world to say they saw it, and all the rest of the world are called upon to believe it. But it appears that Thomas did not believe the resurrection, and as they say, would not believe without having ocular and manual demonstration himself. So, neither will I. And the reason is equally as good for me, and for every other person as for Thomas. It is in vain to attempt to palliate or disguise this matter. The story, so far as relates to the supernatural part, has every mark of fraud and imposition stamped upon the face of it. Who were the authors of it is as impossible for us to know as it is for us to be assured that the books in which the account is related were written by the persons whose names they bear. The best surviving evidence we now have respecting this affair is the Jews. They are regularly descended from the people who lived in the same time this resurrection and ascension is said to have happened. And they say, it is not true. It has long appeared to me a strange inconsistency to cite the Jews as a proof of the truth of the story. It is just the same as if a man were to say, I will prove the truth of what I have told you by producing the people who say it is false. That such a person as Jesus Christ existed, and that he was crucified, which was the mode of execution at that day, are historical relations strictly within the limits of probability. Pardon me. He preached a most excellent morality and the equality of man, but he preached also against the corruptions and avarice of the Jewish priest, and this brought upon him the hatred and vengeance of the whole order of priesthood. The accusation which those priests brought against him was that of sedition and conspiracy against the Roman government, to which the Jews were then subject and tributary. And it is not improbable that the Roman government might have some secret apprehensions of the effects of this doctrine as well as the Jewish priest. Neither is it improbable that Jesus Christ had in contemplation the delivery of the Jewish nation from the bondage of the Romans. Between the two, however, the virtuous reformer and revolutionist lost his life. It is upon this plain narrative of facts, together with another cause I am going to mention, that the Christian mythologists, calling themselves the Christian Church, have erected their fable, which, for absurdity and extravagance, is not exceeded by anything that is to be found in the mythology of the ancients. The ancient mythologists tell us that the race of giants made war against Jupiter, and that one of them threw 100 rocks against him at one throw, that Jupiter defeated him with thunder and confined him afterwards under Mount Etna, and that every time the giant turns himself, Mount Etna belches fire. It is here easy to see that the circumstances of the mountain, that of its being a volcano, suggested the idea of the fable, and that the fable is made to fit and wind itself up with that circumstance. The Christian mythologists tell us that their Satan made war against the Almighty, who defeated him and confined him afterwards, not under a mountain, but in a pit. It is here easy to see that the first fable suggested the idea of the second, for the fable of Jupiter and the giants was told many hundred years before that of Satan. Thus far, the ancient and the Christian mythologists differ very little from each other, but the latter have contrived to carry the matter much further. They have contrived to connect the fabulous part of the story of Jesus Christ with the fable originating from Mount Etna, and in order to make all the parts of the story tie together, they have taken to their aid the traditions of the Jews. For the Christian mythology is made up partly from the ancient mythology, and partly from the Jewish traditions. The Christian mythologists, after having confined Satan in a pit, were obliged to let him out again to bring on the sequel of the fable. He is then introduced into the Garden of Eden in the shape of a snake or a serpent, and in that shape he enters into familiar conversation with Eve, who is no way surprised to hear a snake talk. And the issue of this tete-a-tete is that he persuades her to eat an apple, and the eating of this apple damns all mankind. After giving Satan this triumph over the whole creation, one would have supposed that the church of mythologists would have been kind enough to send him back to the pit. Or, if they had not done this, that they would have put a mountain upon him. For they say that their faith can remove a mountain. Or have put him under a mountain, as the former mythologist had done, to prevent him getting again among the women and doing more mischief. But instead of this, they leave him at large, without even obliging him to give his parole. The secret of which is that they could not do without him, and after being at the trouble of making him, they bribed him to stay. They promised him all the Jews, all the Turks by anticipation, 9/10 of the world besides, and Mahomet into their bargain. After this, who can doubt the bountifulness of the Christian mythology? Having thus made an insurrection and battle in heaven, in which none of the combatants could be either killed or wounded, put Satan into the pit, let him out again, giving him a triumph over the whole creation, damning all mankind by the eating of an apple, these their fables together, They represent this virtuous and amiable man, Jesus Christ, to be at once both God and man, and also the Son of God, celestially begotten, on purpose, to be sacrificed, because they say that Eve in her longing had eaten an apple. Putting aside everything that might excite laughter by its absurdity, or destitution by its profaneness, and confining ourselves merely to an examination of the parts, it is impossible to conceive a story more derogatory to the Almighty, more inconsistent with His wisdom, more contradictory to His power, than this story is. I'm going to make a pause there because I've got cotton mouth. That's better. And now we'll have a little puff. My little storyteller guy back there. Storyteller guy. That little bit of spray paint art was made by Pinky. Pardon me. Okay, back to it. In order to make for it a foundation to rise upon, the inventors were under the necessity of giving to the being, whom they call Satan, a power equally as great, if not greater, than they attribute to the Almighty. They have not only given him the power of liberating himself from the pit, after what they call his fall, but they have made that power increase afterwards to infinity. Before this fall, they represent him as only an angel of limited existence, as they represent the rest. After his fall, he becomes, by their account, omnipresent. He exists everywhere and at the same time. He occupies the whole immensity of space. No content with this deification of Satan. No, okay, sorry, I read that wrong. Not content with this deification of Satan, they represent him as defeating by stratagem in the shape of an animal of the creation all the power and wisdom of the Almighty. They represent him as having compelled the Almighty to the direct necessity either of surrendering the whole of creation or the government and sovereignty of this Satan, or of capitulating for its redemption by coming down upon earth and exhibiting himself upon a cross in the shape of a man. Does sound rather absurd, doesn't it? Turning the page. Okay. Gotta figure out what page we're on there. Okay. Had the inventors of this story told it the contrary way, that is, had they represented the Almighty as compelling Satan to exhibit himself on a cross in the shape of a snake as a punishment for his new transgression, the story would have been less absurd, less contradictory. But instead of this, they make the transgressor triumph and the Almighty fall. That many good men have believed this strange fable, and lived very good lives under that belief, for credulity is not a crime, is what I have no doubt of. In the first place, they were educated to believe it, and they would have believed anything else in the same manner. There are also many who have been so enthusiastically enraptured by what they conceive to be the infinite love of God to man in making a sacrifice of himself, that the vehemence of the idea has forbidden and deterred them from examining into the absurdity and profaneness of the story. The more unnatural anything is, the more is it capable of becoming the object of dismal admiration. But if objects for gratitude and admiration are our desire, do they not represent themselves every hour to our eyes? Do we not see a fair creation prepared to receive us the instant we are born? A world furnished to our hands that cost us nothing? It is we that light up the sun, that pour down the rain, and fill the earth with abundance. Whether we sleep or wake, the vast machinery of the universe still goes on. Are these things, and the blessings they indicate in future, nothing to us? Can our gross feelings be excited by no other subjects than tragedy and suicide? Or is the gloomy pride of man become so intolerable and nothing can flatter it but a sacrifice of the Creator? I know that this bold investigation will alarm many, but it would be paying too great a compliment to their credulity. Boy, that word seems tough for me to say, credulity, to forbear it on that account. The times and the subject deemed it to be done. The suspicion that the theory of what is called the Christian Church is fabulous is becoming very extensive in all countries, and it will be a consolation to men staggering under that suspicion and doubting what to believe and what to disbelieve, to see the subject freely investigated. I therefore pass on to an examination of the books called the Old and New Testament. These books, beginning with Genesis and ending with Revelation, which, by the by, is a book of riddles that requires a revelation to explain it, are, we are told, the Word of God. It is therefore proper for us to know who told us so, that we may know what credit to give to the report. The answer to this question is that nobody can tell, except that we tell one another so. The case historically appears to be as follows, and I'm going to pause. No, I'm not going to pause. You know what I mean. We're taking a break from reading. I got to check my phone. Pay attention. There we go. Okay. Okay. Now we're back at it. That wasn't too bad, was it? Here, let's do another puff. Good stuff, kids. All right, here we go. But if objects for gratitude and admiration are our desires, so they do not present themselves every hour to our eyes. Okay, I read that, didn't I? Let's see. Oh, okay, here we are. These books, beginning with Genesis, historically appear as follows. Okay. Boy, I lost myself there. When the church mythologists established their system, they collected all the writings they could find and managed them as they pleased. It is a matter altogether of uncertainty to us whether such of the writings as now appear under the name of the Old and New Testament are in the same state in which these collectors say they found them, or whether they added, altered, abridged, or dressed them up. Oh, I ripped a page. That's all right. Be this as it may, they decided by vote which of the books out of the collection they had made should be the Word of God, and which should not. They rejected several. They voted others to be doubtful, such as the books called the Apocrypha, and those books which had a majority of votes were voted to be the Word of God. Had they voted otherwise, all the people since, calling themselves Christians, had believed otherwise. For the belief of the one comes from the vote of the other. Who the people were that did all this, we know nothing of. They called themselves by the general name of the church, and this is all we know of the matter. As we have no other internal evidence or authority for believing these books to be the Word of God, then what I have mentioned, which is no evidence or authority at all, I come in the next place to examine the internal evidence contained in the books themselves. Revelation is the communication of something which the person to whom that thing is revealed did not know before. For if I have done a thing or seen it done, it needs no revelation to tell me I have done it or seen it, nor to enable me to tell it or to write it. Revelation, therefore, cannot be applied to anything done upon earth, of which man is himself the actor or the witness. And consequently, all the historical and anecdotal part of the Bible, which is almost the whole of it, is not within the meaning and compass of the word revelation, and therefore is not the word of God. When Samson ran off with the gatepost of Gaza, if he ever did so, and whether he did or not is nothing to us, or when he visited his Delilah, or caught his foxes, or did anything else, what has revelation to do with these things? If they were facts, he could tell them himself, or his secretary, if he kept one, could write them. If they were worth either telling or writing, and if they were fictions, revelation could not make them true, and whether true or not, we are neither the better nor the wiser for knowing them. When we contemplate the immensity of that being who directs and governs the incomprehensible whole of which the utmost ken of human sight can discover but a part, we ought to feel shame at calling such paltry stories the Word of God. As to the account of the creation, with which the book of Genesis opens, it has all the appearance of being a tradition which the Israelites had among them before they came into Egypt, and after their departure from that country, they put it at the head of their history, without telling, as it is most probable, that they did not know how they came by it. The manner in which the account opens shows it to be traditionary. It begins abruptly. It is nobody that speaks. It is nobody that hears. It is addressed to nobody. It has neither first, second, or third person. It has every criterion of being a tradition. It has no voucher. Whether we read the obscene stories, the voluptuous debaucheries, the cruel and torturous executions, the unrelenting vindictiveness, with which more than half the Bible is filled, it would be more consistent that we called it the word of a demon than the word of God. It is a history of wickedness that has served to corrupt and brutalize mankind, and for my own part, I sincerely detest it, as I detest everything that is cruel. We scarcely meet with anything, a few phrases excepted, but what deserves either our abhorrence or our contempt, till we come to the maliciousness part of the Bible. In the anonymous publications, the Psalms and the books of Job, more particularly in the latter, we find a great deal of elevated sentiment, reverentially expressed, of the power and benignity of the Almighty. But they stand on no higher rank than many other compositions on similar subjects, as well before that time as since. The Proverbs, which are said to be Solomon's thorough thought, most probably. The Proverbs, which are said to be Solomon's, though most probably a collection, because they discover a knowledge of life with which his situation excluded him from knowing, are an instructive table of ethics. They are inferior in keenness to the Proverbs of the Spaniards, and not more wise and economical than those of the American Franklin. All the remaining parts of the Bible, generally known by the name of the prophets, are the works of the Jewish poets and itinerant preachers, who mix poetry, anecdote, and devotion together, and those works still retain the air and style of poetry, though in translation. Did the book called the Bible excel in purity of ideas and expression all the books now extant in the world, I would not take it for my rule of faith as being the Word of God, because the possibility would nevertheless exist of my being imposed upon. But when I see throughout the greater part of this book scarcely anything but history of the grossest vices, and a collection of the most paltry and contemptible tales, I cannot dishonor my Creator by calling it by His name. Thus, much of the Bible, I now go on to the book called the New Testament, that is new will, as if there could be two wills of the Creator. Had it been the object or the intention of Jesus Christ to establish a new religion, he would undoubtedly have written the system himself, or procured it to be written in his lifetime. But there is no publication extant authenticated with his name. All the books called the New Testament were written after his death. He was a Jew by birth and by profession, and he was the Son of God in like manner that every person is, for the Creator is the Father of all. The first four books, called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, do not give a history of the life of Jesus Christ, but only detached anecdotes of him. It appears from these books that the whole time of his being a preacher was not more than 18 months, and it was only during this short time that those men became acquainted with him. They make mention of him at the age of 12 years, sitting, they say, among the Jewish doctors, asking and answering them questions. As this was several years before their acquaintance with him began, it is most probable they had this anecdote from his parents. From this time, there is no account of him for about 16 years. Where he lived or how he employed himself during this interval is not known. Most probably he was working at his father's trade, which was that of a carpenter. It does not appear that he had any school education, and the probability is that he could not write, for his parents were extremely poor, as appears from their not being able to pay for a bed when he was born. The Christian mythologists tell us that Christ died for the sins of the world, and that he came on purpose to die. Would it not then have been the same if he had died of a fever, or of smallpox, or of old age, or of anything else? The declaratory sentence which, they say, was passed upon Adam, in case he eat of the apple, was not that thou shalt surely be crucified, but thou shalt surely die. The sentence of death, and not the manner of dying, crucifixion, therefore, or any other particular manner of dying, made no part of the sentence that Adam was to suffer, and consequently, even upon their own tactics, it would make no part of the sentence that Christ was to suffer in the room of Adam. A fever would have done as well as a cross, if there was any occasion for either. The sentence of death which they tell us was thus passed upon Adam must either have meant dying naturally, that is, ceasing to live, or have meant what those mythologists called damnation. And consequently the act of dying on the part of Jesus Christ must, according to their system, apply as a prevention to one or the other of these two things happening to Adam and to us. And that's where I'm going to stop. And I'll end part 1 of The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in part 2.